Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. It's good to be back after a few unfortunate days off when I simply couldn't speak. Hopefully, we'll make it through the share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We will be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, maybe a piece of Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Beis as well. We begin near the bottom of Kuf Lamed Hey Amud Beis with Siman Tafresh Samaches Seder Tfilas Leil Shmini V'Yomai, the proper Seder of the Tfilos on the night of Shmini Atzeres and the day of Shmini Atzeres, Uboy Beis Seifim, and here we have two Seifim. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Leil Shmini, the night of Shmini Atzeres. Now the Mechaber over here is initially going to be writing from the perspective of Eretz Yisrael, where there's only one day of Yom Tov at the end of Sukkot. There's only one day of Shmini Atzeres. So, says the Mechaber, Leil Shmini, the night of Shmini Atzeres, Oymar Batfilo, we say in Shemona Esrei, Vatita lanu es Yom Shmini, Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh. We thank the Rabbeinu Shalom for giving us the 8th day, which is the Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh. Haggah, the Ramah says, Va'anu noihagin she'ein omrim Chag Bashmini. The Ramah says that, in his words, our minig is not to say Chag when it comes to Shmini Atzeres. Because the Ramah says we do not really find anywhere where Shmini Atzeres is referred to as a Chag. Ella rather, says the Ramah, Omrim Yom Shmini Atzeres. The Ramah says we simply say Yom Shmini Atzeres. We don't use the word Chag at all. So again, the Mechaber said Yom Shmini Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh, and the Ramah said Yom Shmini Atzeres. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Aleph, Leil, the night of Shmini Atzeres. The Chavetz Chaim makes a tangential point over here. He says Ein likbay asuda min mincha ketana ulamayla. On Hoshana Rabbah, which is Erev of Shmini Atzeres, we should not be kavei asuda. We should not sit down to a kvi asuda from the time of Mincha Ketana and onwards. So Mincha Ketana would be 2.5 Shois Zmaniyos, 2.5 hours Shois Zmaniyos before Shkia. This is a halacha that we learned earlier when we learned Hilchas Yom Tov, and the reason for this is since tonight, since the night of Shmini Atzeres, we're going to sit down to a Yom Tov meal. We want to be able to sit down to that Yom Tov meal and eat it b'teyavain, eat it with an appetite. So we're not kavei suda erev Yom Tov after the time of Mincha Ketana, and really even a half hour before that. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. V'loi ka'oisad she'oichlin v'shoisin u'mishtakrin ad she'ein yichaylu l'kadosh b'layla. We should not act like those who make overindulgent su'udais on Hoshana Rabbah. They eat and they drink and they get drunk. And they create a situation where they can't even sit down and make Kiddush Shmini Atzeres at night. Eyes cut and bays. Omer b'tfila. The nusach that we say in the davening is, and the Mechaber said Yom Shmini Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh. Says the Chavetz Chaim, and this is something that comes up often. Let's say after a whole Yom Tov of Sukkot, of davening the Shalosh Regalim Shemona Esrei, and saying over and over again Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh, when it comes to Shmini Atzeres, somebody inadvertently once again says Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh instead of Yom Shmini Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh. V'akar Raglov, and he actually finishes the Shemona Esrei and steps out of Shemona Esrei. Im tzarich lachzar, whether or not he has to go and repeat the Shemona Esrei, yesh deos bein ha'achronim. The Chavetz Chaim says this is a matter of dispute amongst the achronim. Ayin b'shari tshuva, he sends us to the shari tshuva. Ubechai odam klal chavches din tesvav. However, kuli alma, everybody agrees. Im loy siyem habracha, if you did not yet complete that bracha of Shemona Esrei, certainly tzarich lachzar levatita lanu, you should go back to vatita lanu v'loymar kahagin, and you should say it in the proper manner. The Rishon Zatzal, Rav Moshe, and the Igros Moshe paskins that if you say Yom Chag HaSukkos Hazeh instead of Yom Shmini Atzeres HaChag Hazeh, then you are Yotzeh and there's no need to repeat. Ois Katan Gimel, Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, Ayin B'Pri Megadim. The Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Pri Megadim. Sheyesh Shloimar Atzeres B'loi Hei. The Pri Megadim says we should not say Shmini Chag HaAtzeres, we should say Yom Shmini Chag Atzeres, without a Hei. V'inei Rashal V'Taz Kosvu Sheyesh Shloimar Shmini Atzeres Chag Hazeh. The Marshal, the Taz have a slightly different nusach. They say Shmini Atzeres Chag Hazeh. Not Yom Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, Yom Shmini Atzeres Chag Hazeh. Aval Levush Kasav, Levush writes, Gemoshe Kasav B'Shulchan Aruch, the nusach that we find here in the Mechaber, Yom Shmini Chag Atzeres Hazeh, V'chein Hiskim Be'el Yerabba B'Shem Kamer Rishonim U'Biur Hagra. Ois Katan Daled, the Ramah took issue with the Mechaber, and the Ramah said we don't use the word Chag because we don't find Shmini Atzeres referred to as a Chag. Says the Chavetz Chaim Ois Katan Daled, the Lemetzinim Mishomakim Shedikra Chag, Kama Achreinim Yisigu Al Zeh. The Chavetz Chaim says many Achreinim take issue with this Ramah. V'hirbu b'ra'ayos tishmini atzeres mikri chag, and they bring many rayas that Shmini Atzeres is indeed called a chag. Al kain, and therefore ein lintois mimasha kasav ha'mechaber. The Mishnah Berurah writes we should not change in any way from what the Mechaber says, and we should say Yom Shmini Chag HaAtzeres Hazeh. Okay, now we continue with the Mechaber, top line, Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. So far, we spoke about Shmini Atzeres from the perspective of Eretz Yisrael. Now we go to Chutz La'aretz. Says the Mechaber, in Chutz La'aretz, Oichlem Basukkah Balayla Ubayom. We have to eat in the sukkah by the night of Shmini Atzeres and the day of Shmini Atzeres. Let's remember, Shmini Atzeres in the Torah HaKdosha is not a Yom Tov that requires sukkah. Sukkah is only for the first 7 days. It's for the 7 days of Sukkot, not for Shmini Atzeres. However, Mechaber says of Chutz La'aretz, where we have an issue of Sveika D'Yoma, Oichlem Basukkah Balayla Ubayom, we have to eat in the sukkah both the night of Shmini Atzeres as well as the day of Shmini Atzeres, Mipnei Shehu Savik Shvi, because the 8th day is actually a Sveika D'Yoma. Maybe it's not really Shmini Atzeres, maybe it's really the 7th day of Sukkot, maybe it's Hoshana Rabbah, and you have a Chiyuv Daraisa to eat in the sukkah. And therefore, since we have a Savik Daraisa L'chumra, we have to eat in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. However, continues the Mechaber, Ve'ein mevarchin al yeshivasa, we do not make a bracha of leishev basukah, umekachin, and we make kiddush on Shmini Atzeres va'oimrim zman, and we make a shechiyanu because Shmini Atzeres is its own Yom Tov, and therefore it gets a bracha of zman la'atzmai. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Hey, Balayla ubayayim, we have to eat in the sukkah both by night and by day. Aval, however, la'achar she'achlu su'udasan bayayim, after we complete the day Suda of Shmini Atzeres in the Sukkah, Minig ha'olam, the minig of the world is, Sheniftarin min ha'sukkah, that people leave the Sukkah, the Yoshvin b'batehem, and they take up residence in their house. What the Chavetz Chaim means over here is, in contrast to the 7 days of Sukkot, where we're supposed to spend the bulk of our time in the Sukkah. So it's not only that we eat in the Sukkah during the other 7 days of Sukkot, we eat in the Sukkah, we shmooze in the Sukkah, we learn in the Sukkah, we take visitors in the Sukkah, everything we do in the Sukkah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, not so when it comes to Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres, the minig is, you have the daytime Suda in the Sukkah, but after the Suda, you go out of the Sukkah. Minig olam sheniftar min ha-Sukkah, v'yoshvin b'batehem. Aval, however, yisrami le'lechoil afilu ben hashmoshes, but if you want to sit down and you want to eat, then even if it's ben hashmoshes going into Simchas Torah, tzarech lechol b'sukkah, you have to eat in the Sukkah. Now, why you have to do it during ben hashmoshes is an interesting question. Ben hashmoshes is already Savik D'Rabbanan, it's not a Savik D'Oraisa. But the Mishnah Berurah says here, even during Ben Hashmoshes, you have to eat in the Sukkah. Ois Katan Vav, why do we have to eat in the Sukkah on Shmini Atzeres? Mimnei Shu Safik Shvi, because we have a Sveika D'Yoma, maybe it's really the 7th day of Sukkot, maybe it's really Hoshana Rabbah. Umitam zen, for this reason, says the Chavetz Chaim, Harbe Achroinim Itzadidin, many Achroinim rule, Titzarech Gamkein Lishan Basukkah. Many Achroinim say that you should even sleep in the Sukkah Shmini Atzeres night, because they reason it's a Sveika de Yoma. Maybe it's really the night of going into the 7th day of Sukkot. You have a chiyuv to sleep in the sukkah. So many Akrainim say you should even sleep in the sukkah Shmini Atzeres night. V'cheinu gam kedas hagra, that's the opinion of the Gra. However, the yesh Akrainim shesayvim she'ein kedai lishad b'sukkah b'Shmini Atzeres loy b'yayim v'lay b'layla. However, on the other hand, there are many Akrainim, including the Ramah, the Darkei Moshe on the Torah. There are many Akrainim who say that you should not, it's not kedai. It's not kedai to sleep in the sukkah, not by night, not by day. Why? Because when you sleep in the sukkah, that's a clear statement that you're really viewing this time period as being the 7th day of Sukkot. Now, if it's the 7th day of Sukkot, it's not Yom Tov. Hoshana Rabbah is not a Yom Tov. Hoshana Rabbah is a weekday. It's Chol. Now, you are acting today as if it's Shmini Atzeres. It's Yom Tov. It's Kodesh. You cannot do something on Shmini Atzeres that makes the statement that it's Chol. How about eating in the Sukkah? Eating in the Sukkah is also a clear statement that it's Sukkot. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Debish loy magabi achila. When it comes to eating in the sukkah, loy minkar, it's not clearly recognizable that you're saying that it's chayil, that you're saying that it's Hoshana Rabbah. Why? Because sometimes if the weather is nice outside, people like to eat outside on the deck. So, yes, you're eating in the sukkah, but maybe you're eating in the sukkah because it's comfortable. But nobody goes outside to sleep unless they're doing it l'shem mitzvah. And therefore, to sleep in the sukkah would be a clear indication that you're viewing today as Yom Shvi, which would be chayil. But to eat in the sukkah is not that way. Therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, the minig of the Welt is to be mekel when it comes to sleeping and not to sleep in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. Vida, and you should know, says the Chavetz Chaim, according to the rationale of the Poskim that say that you should not sleep in the sukkah b'Shmini Atzeres, there are those that say, you should also not eat peiros in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, nor should you even eat bread in the sukkah if you're going to eat less than a kabetza. What's going on here? Klalei shel davar. The rule is, says the Chavetz Chaim, kol davar she'ein tzarich levarech alav birkas leishe b'sukkah b'shar yemei sukkah. If you're eating something like peros, like fruit, or less than a kabetza of bread, now those are items that all sukkahs long you wouldn't make a leishe b'sukkah. You don't make a leisha b'sukkah during sukkahs if you eat an apple in the sukkah. You also don't make a leisha b'sukkah if you eat pakas b'kabeitz of pas. So the rule, says the Chavetz Chaim, is don't eat anything according to these paiskim. Again, according to the paiskim that say that you should not sleep in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. And why shouldn't you sleep in the sukkah? Because by sleeping in the sukkah, you're making it very clear that you're treating the day like a Hoshana Rabbah, which would mean that it's chayil, not kodesh. Therefore, don't do it. According to those paiskim, says the Mishnah Berurah, there are those that say don't eat peiros or less than a kibetz of pas in the sukkah Shmini Atzeres either. Why? Because you're not going to make because those are items that you would never make a bracha. Now, if you eat more than a kibetz of pas in the sukkah, so then by virtue of the fact that you're not making a leishe pasukah, you're kind of balancing out the two implications that you're making by eating in the sukkah. On the one hand, you're eating in the sukkah, which shows that you're somewhat treating it like a Hoshana Rabbah, but on the other hand, you're not making a bracha. Now, if you really felt it was a Hoshana Rabbah, you'd have to make a bracha. You're not making a bracha. So there's a dichotomy here. You're eating in the sukkah because of the Sveika D'Yoma, but you're also not making a bracha. So it's not clear that you're making it chayil. But if you eat peiros in the sukkah, then the fact that you're not making a bracha doesn't show anything, because you would never make a bracha of a leisha b'sukkah on peiros, on the sukkah, even during sukkahs. So now you don't have that balance. So now it looks like you're really treating it like a Shana Rabbah because you're eating in the sukkah. So again, Klalei Shel Davar, the rule according to these opinions is Kol Davar Shein Tzarech Lavarach Alav Birkas Leisha B'Sukkah B'Shar Yemei Sukkah. Anything that you would eat the rest of Yom Tov in the sukkah without a leishiv, Ein Oichlin B'Sukkah B'Shmini Atzeres, you should not eat it in the sukkah at Shmini Atzeres. V'yesh B'Kilin Bazeh, there are those that are mekel, V'chein Mistabra. There are those that are mekel and say, on the other hand, you could eat Paris in the sukkah. Why? The Ba'achilas Paris, the guy gave the drum shein chayavim mitzadadin, yachalasis b'shmini atzeres k'moshe yirtza b'bayis v'ba'sukkah. So really, you could do whatever you want. Because it's true. If you eat Paris in the sukkah, it looks like you're eating it in the sukkah because it's a Shana Rabbah, and you're not balancing it out by not making a bracha. But on the other hand, eating Paris in the sukkah is something that you're not really chayiv in the sukkah at all. So, by eating Paris in the sukkah, how much are you really showing that you're treating it like Shana Rabbah? Even if it's a Shana Rabbah, you're not really chayiv to eat Paris in the sukkah. So it's a balancing act over here in the Paiskim. He's cutting Zion. So the Mechaber said we eat in the sukkah, but ve'ein mevarchen, but we don't make a leishiv. Why don't we make a leishiv? The kevid yom shmini atzeres hu efshel levruche b'sukkah. Let's remember, why are we eating in the sukkah shmini atzeres? Because it's sveika d'yoma. So that means that mitam chiv d'rabanan of sveika d'yoma, we're eating in the sukkah. So why not make a bracha? You always make a bracha on the rabbanans. So why don't we make a bracha of leishiv b'sukkah shmini atzeres? Explains the Chavetz Chaim why. To kevid the yom shmini atzeresu, since you're calling it shmini atzeres, ef shel levruche b'sukkah the kasher adadi. How are you going to make a bracha? You're going to go make kiddush, and you're going to say yom shmini atzeres achagazeh. Then you're going to make a bracha shekiddush shana b'mitzvayis v'sivan leisha b'sukkah. If you make the leisha b'sukkah, it means it's a shana rabbah. It's not shmini atzeres. It's a styria. You can't do that. Im yom sukkahu la shmini atzeresu. V'im shmini atzeresu la yom sukkahu. And therefore we go l'chumrah. What does it mean we go l'chumrah? We eat in the sukkah because it's a savik daraisa, but we don't make a bracha. And the Achrayim reach a consensus, very important, that Shmini Atzeres by night, we should not eat in the sukkah until after nightfall, till after tzeis. Why? So if you look at Shar Tzion's Cut Yud Beis, he explains it. It's very simple. The reason you shouldn't is because what are you going to do? If you eat in the Sukkah Shmini Atzeres by night too early, maybe it's still a Shana Rabbah. How can you eat in the Sukkah without making a bracha? But you can't make a bracha because you're going to make Kiddush, you're going to call it Shmini Atzeres. So don't eat in the Sukkah until nightfall when it's already for sure Shmini Atzeres. Okay, however, but the Evet, im not al yadav uberach hamaitzi, if you're already washed and you made a maitzi before nightfall, you should still eat in the sukkah and lo yavarach leisha b'sukkah. Tekvar kibel shmini atzeres b'tfilasei b'kiddush. Once you davened Shemini Esrei by Ma'ariv and you called it Shmini Atzeres and you made kiddush and you called it Shmini Atzeres, there's no choice, you can't make a leishiv. It's got ches v'ayim zman by kiddush you make a shechiyanu. The Shmini Atzeres regel b'ftei atzmahu because Shmini Atzeres is its own yomtiv. So now we go to Sif Beis, Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph, second line down, end of the line. Says the Mechaber in Sif Beis, Shacharis, in the morning of Shmini Atzeres, Maitzian Shloisha Svarim, we take out 3 Sifrei Torah, V'karan Ba'echad, and on the first one, now let's remember, the Mechaber now is speaking again from the perspective of Eretz Yisrael, where there's only one day of Yom Tov. Therefore, says the Mechaber, on Shmini Atzeres you take out 3 Sifrei Torah, and in the first sefer, you read V'zayis HaBracha, and you're Messiahim the Torah K'dosha. Ubasheni, and then in the second sefer Torah, Bereshis, you learn from the beginning of Parshas Bereshis, Ad Asher Bara Elokim La'asais, until after Vayichulu, until Sheni. Ubashlishi, and then in the third sefer Torah, you learn the Maftir, Bayam Ashmini Atzeres, Umaftir, and then for the Haftarah, we lay in the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, Vayhi Acharei Mois Moshe. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah here. Ois Katan Tes. V'karin ba'echad, in one Sefer Torah, we lay in V'zayis HaBracha. So the Chavetz Chaim points out something interesting. Usually, whenever we discuss the Kriyas HaTorah of a Yom Tov, we know that on Yom Tov we have 5 olim, we have 5 aliyahs. So usually the Mechaber says we take out a Sefer Torah and we lane 5 aliyahs, right? Because that's a Yom Tov. During the week we lane 3 aliyahs. On Rosh Chodesh we have 4 aliyahs. On Yom Tov we have 5 aliyahs. On Shabbos we have 7 aliyahs. Says the Chavetz Chaim here, a nice cut and test. Over here, the Mechaber does not say that we lay in 5 aliyahs, like the Mechaber is going to say shortly when we speak about Chutz La'aretz. When we speak about Chutz La'aretz, over there the Mechaber will say that on Shmini Atzeres we lay in 5 aliyahs in the first Sefer. Why is this? The Beretz Yisrael she'ein oisin rak yom echad Yom Tov. Right now we're speaking again from the perspective of Eretz Yisrael. And in Eretz Yisrael we only have 1 day of Yom Tov. Haloi oisei hayom hu simchas Torah. Let's remember that in Eretz Yisrael where we have 1 day, Shmini Atzeres is simchas Torah. There's only 1 day of Yom Tov. The lahachi kairin by v'zayis habracha. And that's why in Eretz Yisrael you laid v'zayis habracha on Shmini Atzeres. U'besimchas Torah, and on simchas Torah, the minig is lahaisif al hakruim, to add on aliyahs, right? Because everybody gets an aliyah on simchas Torah. U'kedala el b'simin reish pei beis, like we saw previously in Siman reish pei beis. So what the Chavetz Chaim is explaining is the Mechaber does not say that there are 5 aliyahs on Shmini Atzeres in Eretz Yisrael, because there aren't. There are a lot more than 5 aliyahs. Ois Katan Yud, Ubasheni Bereshis. So in the first Sefer Torah we lay in V'zayis HaBracha, in the second Sefer Torah we lay in Bereshis. Why do we start Bereshis right after completing V'zayis HaBracha? Why do we have to start Bereshis on Shmini Atzeres or on Simchas Torah and Chutz La'aretz? Let's just lay in V'zayis HaBracha, be Messiah the Torah, and we'll start Bereshis on the next Shabbos with Parshas Bereshis. Explains the Chavetz Chaim, Olahachi Regila Lahaskal Miyad Bereshis. It is for this reason that we start to lay Bereshis right after completing V'zayis HaBracha. Shalo Yehei Pischain Perla Satan, so that there shouldn't be any opening for the Satan, Lekatreg, to be Mekatreg. Loimar, to say, Kvar Simu Oisa. You see, Klal Yisrael, they finished the Torah. They finished V'zayis HaBracha. Veda writes them Kreiside. They're done. They're finished. They don't want to look at it again. They lay in V'zayis HaBracha, they close the Sefer Torah, they put it away, they're done. So to take away from that argument of the Satan, right away we take out another Sefer Torah and we start to lay in Bereshis to show that we're continuing. Aizkan Yud Aleph, we lay in Bereshis until Asher Bara Lekim Asais, points out Chavetz Chaim, Umanichet Sefer Torah Hashlishis Etzla, like we always do, we take the Maftir Sefer Torah, we put it down on the bima next to the second Sefer Torah, V'ayimrim Chatzi Kaddish, and we say a Chatzi Kaddish that goes on all 3 Sfarim. We say a Chatzi Kaddish, it goes on the first Sefer that we lay in V'zayis HaBracha, but we don't need to put the V'zayis HaBracha Sefer on the bima, because we know that the Kaddish goes on that Sefer. We know we laid from that Sefer, and the Kaddish that we say now is going to cover the first Sefer and the second Sefer that's still on the bima. The third Sefer, the Maftir Sefer, we have to bring up onto the bima before we say the Kaddish, because it's not obvious that the Kaddish is going to go on that Kriya, because that Kriya is coming after the Kaddish. Okay, now let's continue the Mechaber. 2 lines up from the bottom in the middle of the line. Now the Mechaber starts to discuss Chutz La'aretz. Uvamakom she'osid shnei yamim tovim, in Chutz La'aretz where we have 2 days of Yom Tov, ein moitziin b'yom harishayin elo shnei svarim. When we were talking about Eretz Yisrael with this 1 day of Yom Tov, Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah on the same day, so that on Shmini Atzeres you take out 3 svarim. But on Chutz La'aretz, on Shmini Atzeres you only take out 2 svarim. V'karin be'echad chamisha be'parshas re'ei mikol ha'bechor. So then, on Shmini Atzeres, we lay in 5 aliyahs, and we begin in Parshas Re'ei from Kol HaBechor. Now, the Chavetz Chaim is going to point out in the Mishnah that that's not actually what we do. V'imu Shabbos, Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Beis. If Shmini Atzeres falls out on Shabbos, Karin Shiva. Then we have to lay in 7 aliyahs because it's Shabbos. How do we squeeze in 7 aliyahs? Umaschilin aser to aser. We go back in the parsha and we actually begin the Kriya from Aser to Aser, so we have more psukim with which to make 7 aliyahs. Maftir, as far as the Haftarah, Shmini Atzeres, Chutz La'aretz, Kari Bashedi B'Yom Shmini Atzeres, Maftir, the Haftarah, B'Malachim comes from Sefer Malachim, Vahi Kechaloi Shloimoi, it talks about Shlomo Melech and the Chalukas Habayis on the Beis Hamikdash. Umachzer Asvarim, and then we put the Svarim back onto the Bima, Vayme Kaddish, and we say Chaz Kaddish, Umachriz Mashav Arach Umarid Hagashem, and we have to call out that we're going to be saying Mashav Arach Umarid Hagashem. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Back on Kuflam and Vav and Aleph, he's cutting Yud Beis. Mikol Abachar. The Mechaber said that at Chutz La'aretz Shmini Atzeres we have 5 olim, and we begin the Kriya in Parshas Re'eh from Kol Abachar. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'anu maschil aser ta'aser afilu chol b'chol. The Mechaber said that normally we start the Kriya from Kol Abachar. If Shmini Atzeres falls out of Shabbos, we begin earlier from Aser to Aser. Says the Chavetz Chaim, our minig is we always start from Aser to Aser, even during the week. Why? Mipnei shu zman ma'asros u'matnas aniyim. Because Sukkot is a time for giving Meiser and Matnas Aniyim, and that's the Parsha of Aser to Aser, that's what it discusses. Amnam, however, B'di'eved, in a B'di'eved situation, in Kfar Berach Hadaita Likrois Kol HaBachar, let's say the Balkar already pointed out to the Oila that we're beginning from Kol HaBachar, and the Oila made the bracha already, Ein Tzarech Lachzar, we don't have to go back to lane from Aser to Aser. He's cutting Yud Gimel, Shiva. If Shmini Atzeres falls out of Shabbos, we need Shiva Kruah. We have to make 7 aliyahs. Let's say you accidentally, inadvertently, you didn't realize that there's a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov, so you laned according to the Yom Tov schedule. You only had 5 olim. Lo yarma Kaddish. Don't say Kaddish after the 5th aliyah. V'yachzor v'yikra shtei olim. Call up another 2 and repeat the Kriya. Repeat another 2 aliyahs. Or at least make sure to add 1 so you'll have 7 together with the maftir, which b'di'evit is okay. If you already said Kaddish, if you didn't yet do Hagbad Galila on the first Sefer, Yachzer v'yikra, so repeat the laning, v'yarme Kaddish pa'mishenis and say another Kaddish. But if you already took down the first Sefer off the Bima, Yikra Oila Echad LaSefer Hasheni, call up 1 aliyah on the second Sefer Torah, v'yashlim imay Parshas Aser to Aser, and lane the whole Parsha of Aser to Aser, so that'll be your 6th, v'achakach Yikra L'mafter b'chavis hayom, and then you'll have the 7th, will be the Mafter. Oizkan Yodalid, Aser to Aser, v'manichin Sefer Torah Shliya Etzlo v'ayru Chatzi Kaddish. Like usual, you take the second Sefer Torah, put it next to the first Sefer Torah on the Bima, and you say Kaddish, Ois Kat Tezvav, Umazkir in the Shamais, Ad Shmini Atzeres, Chutz La'aretz, we say Yizkar, V'ayimim Avarachamim, and we say Avarachamim. Umachriz Mashav Ruach, B'vor Le'el B'simit Kuf Yodalid, Ayin Sham. And with that, we will stop over here. So Baruch Hashem, we managed to get at least a complete share in today. Thank you so much for joining me for Liman HaTorah. Be well.